Welcome and aloha. Thanks for joining us at ThinkTech Hawaii. Just a little reminder at the beginning, this is fundraising time of the year. For those of you who are willing and able to help support ThinkTech Hawaii, we really, truly appreciate it. Putting these difficult conversations to make good trouble out there is attributable entirely to you folks and your support, so we count on it. Today, we're going to talk about public trust, mistrust, where the needle is going and how we can move it in a better direction. And we have Tina Patterson, mediator, arbitrator, and consultant. We have David Louie, former attorney general, now law partner with Kobayashi, Sugita, and Goda, and David Larson, immediate past chair of the ABA section of dispute resolution and professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. We'll go to our panelists in just a sec. Okay, welcome. So if we had a needle on a scale between public trust and mistrust of government, leadership, whatever term you want to put in there, where are we now? David, you want to start us off?
Well, I'm afraid I'd probably put the needle on under the 50% mark. I think that we're at a kind of a historic high in terms of our mistrust of government for a number of different reasons. You know, we are so polarized that one side doesn't trust the other side at all. We're getting constant breaking news of really corrupt practices that is kind of fueling this mistrust. As we all know, there's been a series of revelations about Justice Clarence Thomas. They just seem to keep coming. Most recent one being that apparently a grandnephew for whom he had legal custody, Harlan Crow, who financed these lavish vacations for him, also paid private school tuition for this child for whom he had custody. And estimates run as high as $150,000. They're very expensive private schools. One of the spokesperson for him said that, well, it wasn't 4 years, only 2 years. So I guess maybe it's only $75,000. But, $75,000 for a child's education would be very welcome for a lot of families. So when we keep seeing news reports like this, it's really troubling. And they seem to keep coming. And I think that people are just continuing to be discouraged.
Tina, your thoughts? Where's the needle and what put us there?
Sure. I agree with David, but I think it's a little bit further than 50%. I think we're closer to 70%. And I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of a breakdown in communication among party lines within parties. We see both Republicans and Democrats both pointing fingers at one another, but quickly turning around and feeding on one another. And I think it's leading the public to wonder where is the real information? And we're seeing, I think if our founding fathers were still alive, most of them would be shaking their heads in disbelief because the structures that they put in place are literally being dismantled by those who either were appointed or elected. So I think the needle's close to 70%. And I know last week I said that the U.S. in many ways is showing signs of being a failed nation state. And unfortunately, I have to hold on that position again, that, when we look at countries that we describe as failed nation states, a lot of the things that we're doing are following right along that playbook. And the most recent discussions regarding our economic status and what we're doing regarding the debt ceiling and the ramifications of what that means, not just for the U.S., but who holds our debt, what happens to the U.S. dollar abroad and domestically, I don't think it's being thought out. It's more a posturing exercise that is failing.
So, David Louie, you've been Attorney General. You've spent most of your life, as Tina and Dave have as well, trying to establish the rule of law for as diverse and inclusive a group of people as you possibly can, and have done that quite well. Where are we? Where are we going? What might help us go in a better direction?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. These are troubling times, really troubling times. What we have is a wholesale loss of trust in institutions, starting with the Supreme Court, but Congress, even big business. People do not trust that leaders today have the public good at heart or in their or foremost in their minds. There are still a number, but when you have the Supreme Court saying, "Oh, there's nothing to see here, move along," I do as I say, but don't do as I do. And just ignore what I do. That's very troubling. But Congress is terrible. Look at the way that the Congress is dysfunctional. Leaders of political parties will say anything, do anything, pull any tricks. And this happened. I'm highly critical of the Republicans, but the Democrats sometimes aren't much better on some things. And we don't have bipartisan action. Truly, people say they want that, but many times it's a grab for power. So where are we? We're not doing very well. I still hold out hope. I veer from deep depression and skepticism that we will ever come out of this death spiral. But then on other days, I talk to people like U.S. Senator Doug Jones, and I see the example of people like Bill Gates and the examples that Jimmy Carter gave. True selfless leadership that's led by example and set great examples for people. And that's what we need more of to kind of restore public trust. But a lot of these are self-inflicted wounds, like the Supreme Court. And it's going to take individual leadership to step up and tell and show people that, in fact, our leaders do have the public good at heart.
So what might help us move in a better direction? As a friend once put it, he said, Chuck, it's not the greed and the avarice and all that stuff that gets people into serious trouble. It's the overconfidence of thinking that they can do it and get away with it that takes them over the edge of the cliff. Are we seeing any of that happen now?
Well, in terms of what can we do, I think there's often a sense that we can't do anything, and I'm just too small, and I can't have any impact at all. But it's a progressive system of leadership and power, and if nothing else, you can get involved at a local level, and counties have a lot of power in our governmental structure, and when it comes to elections, counties exercise a lot of control. Because often when you have even a federal election, the first certification level happens at the county before it goes to the state. And, and there's all kinds of things happening at the county level that we need to be concerned about. People are putting in these poll watchers with no distance limits that are really going to serve as intimidation. I think one thing we can do is to recognize that it really is a scaled system of power, and that if we get involved at the lower levels, we actually can have some influence and maybe be, in a sense, watch people, making sure that people are acting more ethically and less corruptly. When we look at, some of what's, I guess, distressing is we look at what's happening even at state legislators with state legislators, is that it's pretty explicit. I mean, recently in Florida, we saw that several things happened, that the Florida legislature is really trying to kind of grease the rails for DeSantis to run for president. So they've done several things. They've passed legislation that's going to conceal his travel, both past, present, and future. So even though he's using taxpayer money to fly around, we won't know where he's going. And they say it's because of security reasons. They've given him $12 million to fund his migration relocation program, and that's particularly disturbing. And they're doing this pretty explicitly in the wide open. So one thing we need to do is to be vocal about our opposition to that kind of practice if we do oppose it. And I, for instance, would oppose it. I do oppose it. And I think we need to, and nothing else, write letters to editors, be engaged in your local politics. Talk to your elected representatives at the local level. Say that, what are you doing? What are you doing giving, a governor candidate $12 million to ship $12 million of our tax money to ship people around the country? Make people accountable and make them answer your questions. So I think by getting involved that we can have some influence. The other thing happened in Florida, they passed used to be resign to run law. It was kind of repealed briefly when they showed Charlie Crist might be John McCain's vice president, which he wasn't. But then they reenacted it in 2018. But now they dropped it again. So what that again says that DeSantis can run for president, doesn't have to worry about giving up his governorship. And if he's flying around on planes that we don't know where they are and how they're being funded, that's just fine. But, we don't want to worry about that. And I think we should worry about it. And again, make our elected representatives at both the federal and the state level accountable to what are you doing, and tell me why you're doing it. And in particular, maybe I don't like it and I don't want you doing it, and I'm not voting for you next time if you keep doing it.
Okay, David, I see you nodding. Is that triggering some turning wheels there?
Yeah, I think that I totally agree with David that people need to get involved, people need to speak up, people need to make their voices heard. I believe that political power through the ballot box is very important, and working with legislators is very important. And legislators do respond. Now, obviously, when you have corrupt legislators, you got to kick them out of office. We've had some corruption here in Hawaii, unfortunately, with some of our public leaders, and we have gotten rid of them. Hopefully, we can change that. But, it's very hard to legislate morality. And it's very hard if you don't catch these people to make sure things are going well. But the thing that is distressing to me, quite frankly, Chuck, is that it seems to be a breakdown of the social compact, in some ways, a breakdown of the thin veneer of civilization that our country has thrived on for as long as I've been alive. Because, the loss of the press, you have Fox News out there spreading lies and misinformation and disinformation, all in the name of profit. You've got big corporations like Elon Musk just sort of running rampant with authoritarian types of things and ruining Twitter and then opening it back up as a platform for Donald Trump. You've got one of the really troubling things is the loss of regulation by the government, where you have the Fed shockingly not paying enough attention. And if banks go down, if we have banks and people lose trust in banks and the banking system, which has been the spine, the backbone of this country, we're really going to be in trouble. So I look at all of these trends. I'm very worried about the social isolation caused by social media. The pandemic accelerated that, and people need to get out and they need to engage, and they need to do exactly what David Larson was talking about, which is to let other people know what they think and what they support, and to be vocal in their support of good people and good leaders.
And Tina, you've shared some really important insights on how democracy dies and how we become a failed nation state. Where are we now? And are there things that offer some reason for hope, some reason for trust?
Absolutely, Chuck. There's always opportunity for hope. I think about Pandora's box. What was the last thing that came out of the box? Hope. But there's always hope. But the question now is whether Americans are prepared to do what is necessary. This is not just a soundbite on Twitter, 200 plus characters, or a moment on TikTok, or a post on LinkedIn. This is continuous effort. And I agree with both David and David have said, if you have someone who is holding elected or appointed office and they are not doing what they are not doing what is in the best good of the community that they're serving, move them on. Move them on either the next election cycle or the next opportunity. And we all know that there's other ways to remove people, which are less than pleasant. But if it's necessary and if it's harming the public good, the person needs to move on. So are there things that can be done? I think David Larson has outlined a few. I before this show had the opportunity to read an invite that I had received to attend a book talk, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear about Richard Haas's book, The Bill of Obligation. And he literally is talking about 10 obligations that we as Americans have if we want to have a flourishing democracy. And if you don't mind, I'm going to share them because they're things that we talk about and they're things that I think that we can do. And some of us are doing. Be informed. And that doesn't mean listening to your cousin or your favorite aunt or that neighbor down the street who always has a twist on things, but get accurate information and check the sources. That doesn't mean you have to stay up all night and do it, but accurate sources. Get involved, whether that's getting involved with the PTA or getting involved with your community. As David said, on the county level, on the local level, it actually runs up. You don't want to write a letter to the president? That's fine. Write a letter to the mayor of your town. Write a letter to the head of the school board if they're not doing what you want them to do, the school superintendent. Stay open to compromise. And I think this is where we see failure at the national level and local level. You don't agree with me, so guess what? My colleagues and I will vote you out. That's not compromise. That's not. That's literally taking a hard stand and playing hard tactics of negotiation. Remain civil. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Memphis and Montana. Yeah, I was just kind of picking up what you said.
Yes. Yeah, just, it's civil discourse. Remain civil. And it means, and I'm a little surprised, Massachusetts recently allowed a law saying, it's okay to be disruptive. And it's not. As someone who is trying to run a meeting in a civil manner, the worst thing you can have is have public chaos going on in front of you where you literally have to call in security or law enforcement to assist you. It disrupts the meeting and it sends a message that the seriousness of the meeting isn't really of importance. Value norms is also on the list. Promote the common good, back to promoting what is the good of the citizenry of that community, and respect government service. Those who serve, and I'm talking about those who are serving in an appropriate fashion, respect the service, but also know that the service can sometimes fail and speak up. Support the teaching of civics. And I know that the American Bar Association, Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, and other organizations are promoting teaching civics in elementary schools, but also reminding us adults what civics mean. And sometimes we forget, we think it's one thing and it's not. It's really that engagement and knowing that what district do you live in? Who's your congressman? Who's your senator? And number 10 on Richard Haas's list was put country first. I found it interesting because I think it's straightforward, and the Council on Foreign Relations, which Richard is the president of, actually has additional materials. And this goes back to the supporting of the teaching of civics, where it doesn't have to be I'm wrong, you're right, but an opportunity for discussion. In 2018, I participated as a facilitator in an event with the National Institute for Civil Discourse. And it was supported by independent booksellers. And they really tried to bring people together to have this civil discourse. And it worked in some communities. In other communities were concerned that they might have opposing views. Well, how are you going to have discourse if you have everybody that thinks the same thing? And literally, we don't want to invite people who may disagree with us. Okay, so now you're in an echo chamber. How does that work if you really want to have a flourishing democracy?
Picking up on something David was saying a minute ago, that idea of a social compact. If we're going to be a democracy, kind of a fundamental part of that understanding is that everybody gets to participate. That's a democracy. Everybody gets to vote. And that kind of fundamental understanding, is being lost by some people intentionally as a kind of a power grab, that we're going to disenfranchise people, and that's how we're going to retain power. But the idea of embracing the concept and belief in democracy in its pure sense is something that we're struggling with right now, and to kind of pick up what David was saying, that's distressing. And picking up, anything to be hopeful about. Well, 14 Proud Boys and Oath Keepers have been convicted of seditious conspiracy, and kind of going back to, we need some accountability. Well, that's encouraging. When we start seeing some accountability and our justice system moves slowly, some frustratingly slowly, but at least we're seeing some things happening now that are encouraging. And when we're thinking about mistrust, when somebody's saying, I have, my love of AR-15s is greater than my love for your children, that is so disappointing and distressing that we need to call people out on that continually. Don't let them forget what the consequences we're seeing. We've now had almost 200 mass shootings, 4 or more people getting shot. We've had almost, and moving towards 200 for this year. We need to keep reminding our elected representatives what's happening, and that this isn't just a rifle range and a toy and something to play with. There are significant consequences happening now almost every day, and stay on them to say that stop facilitating this, and protect the lives of our children.
I totally agree with that, David. The thing that I worry about is that there are all of these influences that are in our lives today, and trends that are in our lives where they're working against social engagement. What I see in my community is that people are less inclined to step forward. The rise of the internet, the pandemic, caused people to pull back from social engagement. And I totally support social engagement and civics and the teaching of that, but people are less willing to step forward. I see this in leadership positions and in public positions. Not as many people want to be judges. Not as many people are willing to step forward and take on leadership roles. And that's a troubling thing, because if you don't have people who are willing to do that, you don't have the best and brightest moving forward, then we're going to get something that's worse than what we really deserve. And so these are troubling trends, and we have to encourage people to become engaged, to talk, to be out there, to be part of the community. And those are hard things. It's a heavy lift, because people want to just kind of sit back and do their thing, be in an echo chamber, be in a bubble, and not listen to hard truths or hard facts from other people. And it's a very difficult kind of a thing. But I think we just have to keep working at it, and hopefully we're going to have leaders who step up and do those things and show leadership, show true leadership, but at all levels. It can be at just serving on your PTA, just serving on a committee in your church, just stepping forward to help engage and to help with concerted action. Because when we work together, we can always do so much more than any individual can do.
David, I want to follow up on something that you said regarding those stepping up for leadership, because I've seen it, I've experienced it, and I think it's important to talk about. There is a cost to serving as a leader. And I think one of the aspects that we talked about was the civility and compromise. So for those who are serving as elected, appointed officials in that capacity, I think we, as part of this social engagement, there's been a breakdown of boundaries where people feel that it's okay for me to show up at your house, and it's okay for me to disrupt your child during their little league game because I want to talk to you. And it can be unsettling. It can be unnerving for that person who is selected or decided to take that position. They understand the rigors, but sometimes the family and extended family don't. And it does make people step back. And I'm hoping that if we can, as we wrap our arms around what civility means, that these boundaries are put back in place so that those who are in positions and they're doing what they're supposed to do can feel comfortable knowing that I'm not going to have someone try to show up at my child's bat mitzvah, or not going to have someone suddenly throwing eggs at my house in the middle of the night or following me down the street, because it does leave that person with that unsettled feeling. And we've seen it in the news. People are getting death threats. People are receiving items that they really shouldn't be receiving in the mail and otherwise. And it does make people pause and say, do I really want to subject myself to that? And unfortunately, the answer oftentimes is, no, I don't.
You know, the hope is that things get so desperate that people say, yeah, there's consequences, but I just can't sit by the sideline any longer. I mean, to the point where, are you comfortable knocking on a stranger's door? We've seen some horrible instances in recent weeks of people that knock on the wrong door and they get shot. You know, don't we want to do something about that? Do we want to live in a world where we can't walk 2 houses away because we haven't met them before and knock on their door? So that's extremely, I hope, motivating. That at some point people will say that I don't want to live in this environment anymore. And even though I understand there's cost to getting involved, I can't live in the status quo, and I'm gonna have to step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's troubling when election officials are people who are monitoring the elections, which should be a no-brainer. Everybody should support it, but instead they get trash dumped on their front yards. They get called out. They get death threats for just trying to ensure a fair and free election. These are very troubling developments. And quite frankly, with the rise of Chat GPT and AI that can allow fakes now, I was reading an article about how it's very difficult to separate truth from fiction these days. And it's becoming more and more difficult with AI coming up. And one of the fathers of AI just resigned from Google and then talked about how there's these dangers, and coming up with the tools that allow us to verify facts, that allow us to verify truth, and allow us to, prevent people from cheating and creating false images and doing those things. It's very troubling. But that's, part of the problem is the world's accelerating in so many ways, besides the climate change, but just all of the tech, all of the acceleration. Things are happening so fast, people are having a hard time keeping up. And
technology is running away from us.
Yeah.
When we think about the potential for technology, it should be the thing that allows us to overcome this social isolation. I mean, theoretically, it can overcome geographic distances. It can assist people with disabilities. I mean, the potential for connecting seems to be great, but we have not devised how to do that effectively. And now, with the kind of introduction or the acceleration of AI and what David's talking about and the deep fakes, it's continuing to run away from us. And I think moving forward, we need to think seriously about how we can corral it a little bit, put some guardrails, because right now I feel that, again, we've hit another iteration of technology and we're heading into a sprint, and we're not sure where we're going and how we're going to control it.
So in our last minute, last words, what's one thing you would most like to see happening that might give grounds for hope and trust?
More public civic engagement. Go to the polls.
David, either David?
Yeah, my view is just hopefully the good leaders will step up and set examples. But you have leadership at all levels, and that good people at every level will step up and set an example and do what Tina's talking about and become engaged.
Yeah, and even if you're not willing to volunteer to serve in a position yourself, talk to your representatives. I mean, that's not a huge commitment. But when you see things happening that you don't like, don't be quiet. Contact that person, tell them why you don't like it, why you think it's destructive, it's not productive, and hold them accountable.
Thank you all for your time today. We've run out of time, but reminding us that trust building is a central task of life and a responsibility for each of us individually and collectively. The relationship building, the trust building, the consensus building that we do for a living has to be at the center of the kind of people that we are and the kind of people that we ask and expect of others. Thank you all. We'll be back in a couple of weeks again. If you follow and support ThinkTech, please go to our page, click the donate link, and help us continue. Thank you all. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.